Hello, everybody. This is Lupe Munoz.
And I'm Steve McKeon, and this is the Leadership Exchange.
Alex Aranda is our guest today. She's a human resource professional with a pretty unique experience, actually, because she's had experience with lean leadership, cultural transformation, and continuous improvement. I think recently got more involved with operational excellence, a great perspective that we hope to get. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Lupe. Thank you, Steve. I'm very excited to participate today.
And we're happy to have you here, Alex. Really looking forward to your story and letting our listeners learn a little bit more about you.
Yeah, please, Alex, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
I began my career in HR about 20 years ago. And I think like most HR professionals, I fell into this profession by accident. I had, just graduated college and was not really thinking about, wanting to jump into a full-blown profession, as scary as that sounds. But I had an opportunity to join a food manufacturing company in HR capacity. And, from there, I just really enjoyed the work that I was doing. My boss at the time described me as a sponge. And so that provided an opportunity for me to learn new things. And along the way, my HR experience has been primarily supporting food, pharmaceutical, and more recently, beverage manufacturing environments. I would describe myself as a true generalist just because I've been able to dabble in many functions of HR, everything from talent acquisition to learning and development and beyond. And as I mature in my career, my interests really have gravitated towards the work around cultural transformations, developing high performance work teams, and just helping individuals and teams reach their maximum potential. On a personal note, I love to share that I'm a mom. I have 3 kids, Cammie, Allie, and DJ. I did tell them I was going to be on the podcast, so I have to give them a shout out.
Yeah, a couple new listeners for us potentially as well, Alex.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Exactly what I was thinking. I'm like, hey, we got some hopefully lifelong listeners now.
Yes, indeed. They're not regular listeners at this point, but I'm working towards that. Let me just say that.
All right. Alex, thank you for telling us a little bit more about yourself. Would love to hear a story. We love to start our episodes with a story. So if you do have one, where our focus for today is going to be around people systems, how that's important to a leader. And so any story that you can share with us that you think would be relevant to the topic would be great.
I'll share an example where I was recently moving into this role as HR manager. I was supporting a pharmaceutical manufacturing company, and I was really hired with the intention to help the leadership team at increasing the organizational capabilities of the facility. I think just, very early on, what became evident to me was that there was an opportunity to improve the quality of the talent acquisition process. So if you think about the process by which a organization goes after by interviewing candidates and then all of the steps between that to when you bring them in the door for their first day. So I realized that because the company was going through major changes and the expectations for those that were leading the teams was changing, moving away from that classic traditional manager to more of a transformative leader, the biggest standout was that HR had not really adjusted or aligned its process to support this. So by partnering with the leaders from different areas of the company, I really started with asking ourselves and looking at, well, what is the organization requirement? So what are those common behaviors or skills that would best serve our business? Moving from that, we really went on to understanding how leaders would be delivering or not delivering against what is necessary for our business. And ultimately, there was a lot of discussion around how leaders are really going to be helping to support the cultural objectives and the desired culture for that organization. In the end, these items came together to really work into a talent acquisition process where we're looking at revising job descriptions, going beyond knowledge requirements, and really looking at ways to identify what the behaviors would be and the results that would come from that. That's a little bit of an example or a story where I stepped into a organization that did not have an existing or a really well-defined process. It was helping that organization develop that.
So, of all the aspects of HR, Alex, that you've had experience around, there's key framework, I'm sure, that is required to be repeated on a regular basis. And as a leader, of HR within organizations, what is that standard work that you feel is probably the most important? And is it similar to maybe what other managers should be following or other leaders within the company as well?
That's a great question. I think in the area of people development, one-to-ones are often not really being utilized in such a way where they maximize the potential of what it could be, right? And so I look at one-to-ones from the perspective of, here's a great setting to really build a strong relationship. You're ideally working to foster trust, getting feedback and suggestions on how, in this case, if I'm the person's leader, how can I improve to really help the individual and the broader team? I go back to the keys of servant leadership around, it's not about you, but it's all about you.
Sure. No, that's a really good point, Alex. And maybe because we're going to have some listeners on that haven't heard of a one-on-one before and kind of the tenets of the one-on-one. Do you want to give kind of a quick example, or not example, but how we define like the one-on-one and kind of what you want to accomplish, as the person that's conducting the one-on-one with another team member?
What's like a successful one-on-one has these components? What would you say those are?
From my experience, and there's obviously flexibility because it needs to really be for the benefit of the individual. You want them to get as much as they possibly can out of the, structured meeting. So these are planned, they're purposeful, scheduled events where it might be once every other week. In the beginning of a person coming on board, it might even be weekly. The point is that in this setting, you really are taking the opportunity to ask them about how are they feeling in the job? What are some of the challenges that they're facing? I use one-to-ones as a setting to get feedback from them around, hey, how do you help the individual in any barriers or obstacles that they're facing regarding their work? It's also a good time, from my experience, to really learn more about the person's personal life. If I know sometimes that can make people feel squeamish, but as a leader, it's a good way to demonstrate that you care about the whole person, right? And we can't just turn things off that are in our lives outside of work when we walk in through that door. Just letting people know, hey, I want you to share as much as you feel comfortable sharing is really the way that I approach it. But I think it's important as a leader to set the stage where if a person has to share something, a problem that's impacting their performance at work, where they can do this in a very safe space.
That's great.
I like that, Alex. One of the things that I recall in my past is I used to, I scheduled one-on-ones with my direct reports, which were leaders. And a few times the response from the leaders, my team would be something like, well, we talk every day. We see each other every day, Lupe. I'm not exactly sure what the purpose of the one-on-one is. If we're staying connected daily, we're talking daily, like what's the big deal of having, like they kind of, I guess, perceived it as maybe it's too much or it was a waste of time. I explained to them that, look, this is an intentional window of time that we're creating to really focus on you, to ask specific questions about you, how things are going. I understand that we're going to see each other on a regular basis, but that's within a different context. And this is a more serious discussion because I want to be planful and intentional when it comes to your development, understanding what barriers you have, et cetera. What would your answer be to someone that says, hey, I feel like we're talking every day? Do we really need these one-on-ones?
I think it very similarly, right? Adding to it that there are things that in between meetings, in between projects, the one-to-one really does open up a space where you can find out what is exciting for them about the work that they're doing. Maybe there's personalities or team dynamics that they're not sure how to navigate. These are conversations that you really may not be having in a broader meeting. The one-to-one is an excellent space to do that. That's been my experience, Lupe.
Yeah, that's a good point you both bring up. And, one of the things, Lupe and Alex, that I've run up against is where the one-on-one is just not productive. The other person really is not engaging. They're not going to open up. They just kind of sit there. They want to take notes. They're looking for instruction. And I think as new leader, you'll also have to have a couple, I would say, tricks in the bag on just how you open people up in that environment, right? Obviously, entertainment, sport activities, those common areas that most people like to talk about, and once you can get someone to open up just a little bit to talk about themselves, it generally will manifest itself into a good one-on-one meeting. The other watch out, I think, is understanding, and you touched on it, Alex, is these are not project reviews, right? That's really kind of a different context. You can begin a one-on-one, and then later on, maybe you're starting to talk about projects specific to some of the challenges that the individual's having. But for the first, I'd say 15 to 30 minutes of that, it's really focusing on them and how they're doing, what are they enjoying about the job, how are things going in their personal life. And all that within boundaries, of course. And I think that's really key. Any other tricks, Alex, that you've learned that you think is a new leader out there, they might be interested in knowing a little bit more about getting started with a one-on-one, or maybe, they would like to be able to have a one-on-one with someone that's a peer or even a boss? Is there an approach that you could give them to take to set something like that out?
I do have one more. I think sometimes as a leader, if you feel like the one-on-one is stuck, if it's in a rut or it's just not garnering the intended result that you're after, it sometimes just a simple change in scenery. So I've seen one-to-ones be really good over a meal, sometimes taking a walk. These are things that have helped me. And then I would say that it just is a matter of just getting general feedback. I always ask the individuals, especially in a circumstance where it feels like conversations have been pretty surface over the last few touch bases or one-to-ones. I ask them, just give me your honest impression. How are things going with this meeting? Do we need to do something different? How can we make it better? So just really emphasizing that the intention is to get the most out of it. And so those are some things that have helped, Steve.
Yeah, that's great points, Alex. Thanks for sharing those. And I think, Lupe, just one other last thought there that you had brought up is, the need to maybe let people know before the one-on-one start, just so that they understand the purpose and what you're going to hopefully accomplish in the conversation and in the discussion. And I think that's really good to understand, especially the first time you sit down with folks are like, oh, why does Lupe or Alex want to talk to me? Especially Alex, sometimes when you wear that HR hat, people are like, oh, I got to go talk to HR. What's up?
The anxiety sometimes starts trickling up.
Exactly. I was going to say that the anxiety level goes up. So, Alex, when we talk about people systems in our previous episode, we kind of defined a system in general. Like we talked about a definition of system, people system. When it comes to that, I feel like the one-on-one, you mentioned that. I think that's a really great one, part of the sort of the people system as a leader. Could you give us two more like really critical ones that you feel like, hey, as an organization or as a leader, these are two elements that you really want to focus on?
On an organizational level, and I've seen these done annually, HRP or human resources planning as part of an overall like succession plan is incredibly impactful for an organization, especially when it's leveraged for the right reasons. For those that may not be familiar with HRP, it really is the strategic process in which organizations are working to make sure that they have the right people in the right positions at the right time to achieve their business objectives. It involves discussion, there's calibration, but what you're really doing is identifying gaps in skills or talent and developing people strategies on how to address those gaps. HRPs are incredibly powerful. I think that in the beginning, to a person who's new to this process, a leader particularly, it may seem somewhat daunting, but I think helping people understand why it's important. And then when organizations go through that iterative process of defining high potential to what constitutes critical positions and what are the behaviors that you would see of a high potential, and not just focusing on the performance piece. I believe that that's really where they can be very powerful when they're done right. You come out of there with a lot of ideas and activities to continue developing people. I've seen those be very, very powerful.
Yes.
Alex, related to that, and looking at the different type of systems. So within the HRP, you mentioned annual, and we're taking that snapshot of kind of the current status, that point in time of the individual as they are looked at in terms of either succession planning, potential growth, those type of things. I think the other thing you and I have talked about that I think is also part of the system around HR is just, you got to look out, right? You can't just focus on a year from now or a month from now. You got to start looking at your business and then gauging, how far out into the future do you need to look at it and what are those needs? How do you approach that from an HR perspective and kind of the systems side of HR management?
This goes, in my opinion, related to another critical area of how HR can really play that role as strategic business partner. So it helps when HR is involved in those conversations around organizational strategy, right? When HR has a visibility to what the challenges are that the business is facing, and they're really being included as part of the discussion, then I believe that that's where the most impact comes into play. So I think about specifically like work around the culture. I think about longer term, even though there might not be like a defined timeline for, what the future looks like in terms of 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years. I do think you kind of have to look at it from that perspective. I would say that all of that feels right, Steve. You have to make sure from an HRP perspective that the business has the optimal performance to meet present and future demands. So you have to look at it from both angles, in my opinion.
Alex, thank you.
You talked about the one-on-ones. You talked about an HRP. Totally agree that HRP can be very powerful on an organizational standpoint. Can you give us one more of a sort of individual leader? If I'm an individual leader, let's say I'm a small organization. I have 4 employees. I have, 6 employees. HRP, yeah, that could add value, but what can I use on a more regular basis than maybe once a year that you feel that fits into the people system?
It's something that is, on the surface might seem very tactical and perhaps even a small adjustment, but boy, does it have a huge return. So if I'm thinking about developing a skill as a leader, and how do I help other leaders develop this skill, it would really be around leveraging the Socratic method, developing the skills to ask open-ended questions. It's so important that, especially when you're trying to build this continuous improvement culture and you want to engage leaders and help people at all levels of the organization see how they have a voice, it's you got to be good at that. And you don't need to have a huge training budget to go after that. There's a lot of things that are out there that can be used to help and develop this.
I love that point. I couldn't agree with you more. I appreciate you giving us those nuggets of wisdom for this. For leaders out there, what would you say is the number one mistake that, I'll say young leaders, but I'm really talking about like inexperienced leaders make when it comes to people system? What would you say is the most common mistake that you've seen out there that you want to call out?
This isn't all on leaders. It really is a unfortunate consequence of some of the historical views of HR. And so I'm going to say keeping HR in the background, that is a business problem. I encourage any new leader to really spend the time developing a relationship with HR. So it goes beyond just reading your company handbook and understanding policies. Really start there, but work to understand how can you help HR, where appropriate, redesign people systems so that they support the culture that you're trying to build. In any type of organizational change I'm going to say like cultural transformation, HR has to be a part of that. Getting leaders to feel comfortable going to their HR professional to engage with them on how to approach problems, and even giving them regular feedback. Like I really saw that my ability to help leaders increased significantly when they were just willing to, come forward and share information with me about how policies and HR practices were helping or hurting what they were trying to do. They're opened the door for a lot of collaboration. So I would say, work with HR that is, I know there's a reputation out there about HR being the police and their role around policing policies, working from a compliance perspective, but they can really help set the stage for a successful cultural transformation when they are used properly.
So don't just call them when there's a problem.
Exactly, Lupe.
Okay, yeah. Good advice. Good advice.
A couple points that you were making there, just spot on in terms of that partnership, right? And the more proactive you can be when we're working on people development and really making people feel part of a team, really reduces the negative side, right? Where you're having to do an investigation, somebody's behavior is not acceptable. So I think that was so spot on. And it shouldn't always be that HR going to the department. I just would say new leaders, encourage you to seek out your HR professionals and, develop those relationships with them and, strategize and talk about things that you can work on with them, because they don't expect you to know it all. They're there to support you with your growth and education as well. Alex, I wonder, what do you think is probably your biggest success story so far in your professional career that, as you look back a little bit now and reflect on, what you've been able to accomplish, what's the one or two things that you can really point at and the story that goes behind them?
Yeah, Steve. So I think the biggest success that I can really point to in my career is really around a opportunity where I use this expression where others have pulled me up. I think about going back maybe 7 years ago where I was new to an organization. I feel like I had, some pretty decent experience as an HR professional. I had always had this passion, and it comes with me to the day about, continuing to build my HR expertise. But I was asked to really join a conversation around how can I be a part of solving a problem where there's a culture that we're purposely trying to shape as an organization. And I'm talking leaders that really didn't know me. I was brand new to the organization. These leaders invited me to participate in this brainstorming session. And through several of these discussions and really reflections, we came out with what turned out to be a very well-developed and leadership framework for leaders. And it was something that started off small, but then eventually was used as the model for the entire organization. I really am proud of that work. It's something that is still going on today and being used. It continues to get improved. But I think just that work where I am being a part of the transformation of a culture, that's what feeds my soul. It's where I really am fulfilling my personal and professional purpose, I'll say, and it pulling others up. It's really paying back what other people have done for me. And I wouldn't be here if those things didn't happen.
Oh, that's a great story. Thank you for sharing that, Alex.
Alex, before we wrap up here, we appreciate all the perspective that you've provided for this. On a general recommendation that you would have or advice that you have for just leaders in general, what would be the one piece of advice you would give leaders?
Get good at change management. The only constant in life is change, right? And so helping to foster and facilitate change in such a way where it can be done without really creating unnecessary angst, anxiety, concern. I mean, change management is such a powerful skill. Any leader that wants to continue growing their career, I always, emphasize the importance of get really good around change management. And there's a lot of models out there. There's a lot of tools that can be leveraged. I know that we're all fans of the Wheel of Sustainability, which is definitely something that is very useful and probably the type of change that most leaders are going to be using on a more regular basis. I'd encourage them to really start there. But change management, I can't say enough how important it is to have in your tool chest.
We will add the link to that book. That it's a great book for change management. So we'll include that in our comments for the notes on the podcast. Steve?
Yeah, Alex, we're fans of that book as well. And I think for anybody that's listening to the podcast that, haven't read it, that book, especially to your point about being good at change, can really help leaders, navigate new things that are happening in the organization as well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that wraps us up for the day. Alex, great job. Thank you for your time with us. We look forward to having you be a guest again. But for now, we will conclude. This is Lupe Munoz.
And I'm Steve McKeon, and this is the Leadership Exchange. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Everyone have a great day.